Yeah, for this one we are going to talk about NATO, and right before this I'm going to put the my Patreon stuff into the chat for those interested. I'm putting it right in now, and you'll see it in the chat just for my information. It's also in the bottom of the description. For this, we're going over is it time to end NATO yet? And basically, if we look at NATO's history, it was originally meant to deal with the Soviet Union and the spread of communism, which is really happening through them. And really, if we look at it, the Soviet Union fell, the Berlin Wall fell, and really once that happened, NATO's mission was complete. This meant basically, when we're talking about it, is ever since, let me get the exact date, ever since, let me get, they're not getting an exact date, let's see, November 9th of 1989 is where we get the exact dates that it was demolished for the Berlin Wall. That it was, I guess, ordered, and I guess finished out in 1992. But we could pretty much say that that basically November 9th, 1989 was pretty much when when we can declare that the whole purpose of NATO ended right there, and there was no actual function anymore. Because when we're talking, I mean, even when we're talking about, we can even go into later with the Soviet Union, and which would have been in a slightly later date, is December 26th of 1991. That would have been the latest possible date, the day after Christmas of 1991. And that's the latest possible date that they should have been around. Even though they were at a severely depressed state at that time, this should have been the point at which they should have been dissolved, because they had no purpose at this time. And regardless of what people want to state as, oh, there's other things they can do. No, there's really not. That's really it. There is no, that was their actual function. And once your function ceases, you need to cease to exist. And if we're going to go with another function, let's go with an EU military. Now, the idea of an EU military, let's say with an American backer. Well, the fact is they're not even funding up to about 89% of what would be the 2% GDP for this, and that 2% GDP is would be the 89% of what the average country in the world would be doing. So they're not even funding that the average countries, even the major countries, are not even doing that. Germany's not even doing that. And when we see this means they don't even view an actual threat at that point to make it even worthwhile. This would mean that they're not even seeing NATO as an actual worthwhile investment from an actual defense, and they're not even seeing any actual threat, which is why when we're seeing this, they actually, which is what NATO's trying to make Russia out to be this huge enemy, when they're actually not. The defense amounts that are not disclosed but are estimated for NATO are actually far larger than the actual defense amounts for the amount for Russia itself as a country. So we know that NATO is actually larger than Russia itself, and that would mean that Russia is no threat. Even compared to NATO, NATO is considered separate than each one of those nations, and they're actually viewing themselves. They're actually essentially the ones being the aggressors against Russia itself. And when we view that, we need to view that as showing that if they don't, they've actually shown that these countries would rather have a trade relationship with Russia than anything else, which is showing that NATO really is not even showing its value. From that aspect, they'd rather have a positive relationship with Russia than anything else. Now, we're seeing that basically it's become more of a defense contractor slush fund because of this, and this is an actual issue that we need to realize, and this is something that should be noted. And what's going to and why we're seeing that NATO is starting to move. And if you know what NATO stands for, you're going to be quite surprised with what they've been doing. It actually stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Well, here's a problem. When you start to look at the member states of NATO, you're going to be a little bit surprised when you start to realize that one of the new members is you will see that a new member that was recently added was actually would have actually been what do you call it? Colombia. Now they don't show this on. You're not going to find this on Wikipedia with it because it's actually relatively new. And that's actually something that's actually quite interesting, because when you start looking at that, you're like, well, why are they actually going out to Colombia? And that makes absolutely no sense, because if you know anything about Colombia, well, Colombia is not. It's basically splits between the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific. Now, this is a big problem because, yes, it might be part of the Atlantic, but it is far from the North Atlantic. It is basically, it is right around the equator, and that's not North Atlantic. And this is essentially blowing the whole thing, and this is basically showing that it's basically there for the sole purpose of wanting to intervene in Venezuela, and that's his only purpose of being there. And you'll probably notice that they will probably also want to start doing some things in East Asia. You'll probably see them trying to get areas like South Korea into it as well, beyond just the actual relationship with South Korea with the United States. They'll probably try and get South Korea into NATO as well. I would expect that to happen fairly soon. And that this is because of the fact of what they want is they want this idea of trying to push for regime change and around the globe. And you'll find it'll extend into the Middle East as well. Watch for areas like Saudi Arabia to try to get and Israel to get membership into the areas, regardless if it even makes any sense anymore. Because the fact is we've surpassed it making any sense. because they're not even in any remote areas of it even making any sense anymore. Because this is basically, it's gone from the point of view of the EU, of it basically being functioning around the EU countries to defeat the Soviet Union, to now it actually being about regime change, and about being regime change globally when there's a country that might not be positive to their ideas, and might actually want to think independently from their ideas, and might not want to kind of sink in. And that's where you got this whole thing. And that's where you're sitting in with these whole ideas. And you're going to find a lot of these people like this, and it just falls into line with what's going to happen. And it needs to be understood that as we start to see, I guess today's the birthday of NATO, but I think this is the perfect time to end it right now, because we're seeing this is growing way out of control. I mean, when we're starting to see, basically there was the idea of trying to surround Russia, trying to antagonize them, basically trying to surround all these other countries around the globe, trying to add members in NATO to basically surround them, and just basically doing this just for regime change. And we're going to find the same thing happen around China. So now if you start to look at a map of Asia, you're probably going to find out that they're probably going to start doing the same thing. You're probably going to find areas like you're probably going to find areas like Mongolia. You'll probably find different things. Obviously, South Korea is going to be put into it. Japan. You're probably going to find other countries like in Southeast Asia are going to be put into into NATO. They're going to try to do that one. You're going to have areas even as far south as like Australia are going to be put into NATO, and they're basically going to try and surround them and do the surround China thing. And they're even going to probably try and see if they can't get some of the areas of Central Asia as well to surround them as well. See if like India and Pakistan as well, and get them to surround them on the as well, and on top of that, and it's going to be trying to add them as well. And it's going to be trying to antagonize China on top of that. Just like how they're trying to surround Russia to antagonize Russia. And how they've been trying to antagonize Iran as well. Because they'd rather have relationships with countries like Pakistan, even though Pakistan is highly troublesome. So when we see that with it, we'll see that basically this is kind of where NATO's developing, and NATO's really, when we look at it, has been a military contractor slush fund for over 30 years. And when we look at that, it shows that it really needs to end, because you got basically is is it, or just about 30 years ish. I mean, we're talking that they've been a slush fund is because they know that basically is we're talking that there is no actual purpose to them anymore. And when Trump was talking about eliminating them, that was the actual that's actually the smart purpose is the complete elimination of NATO would be the actual smart thing. And when you see these establishment people in Congress say, no, 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 we can't do that. Those are the what do you call it? Those are the people that want to continue all this stuff with it. Those are the ones that are those are the ones that are actually causing the issues. And we need to understand that this is where some of these things are coming from, and it's more waste of money globally, and it doesn't help anybody. It just basically causes more conflict. Now, if we start to actually look at the way we're supposed to interact with one another from country to country, it should just be friendly trade. As we can see that sanctions are acts of war, as well as basically the antagonizing people through groups like NATO. That is that we're and these war games going right up to the actual borders. Those are actually acts of war as well. They're deliberately meant to antagonize the other side. And we can see that these are just basically wastes of money, and they're deliberately meant to be wastes of money to basically line the pockets of these military contractors. And the military contractors lose money when there is no bloodshed, or there is no potential rise in tensions. When there's rise in tensions, they make more money because their stocks go up. And if NATO were to be disbanded, they would lose a lot of money because NATO essentially is a good force for them for creating tension. And if you eliminate that, and if you eliminate your civilian intelligence, you're not going to have much. And if you start to bring, if the U.S. brings all of their military bases home for actual just for defense, you're not going to have much reason for war, because you're not going to have much conflict globally. There's pretty much because a lot of these countries that rely on the U.S. for backing, when they start doing their bullying of other areas, they're not going to be doing it because they realize there's nowhere to go, because if they end up doing something and screwing up, they're basically on their own, and the U.S. is not going to come to their aid, and that's what's going to happen, and that would be essentially catastrophic for that one country. Just as much as if Saudi Arabia keeps funding terrorism, they know the U.S. is not going to come and go and fight it, that they're going to be basically having terrorism in their own backyard, and they know that they can't deal with that. And the U.S. is only going to fight it if it comes directly at them, and that would cause a different situation for them. And they know it would be catastrophic for them to do that, because when it comes to trade relations, no one's going to. They're not going to have the ability to bring in workers from other countries, which are necessary for its economy. Which means that countries like UAE and countries like Saudi Arabia are going to go bankrupt, and because they only can rely on that fuel for so long. And eventually what's going to happen is, if there's other options for fuel for cars, such as liquid hydrogen, which has really been shelved for quite some time because of relations with these countries, once if that goes through, you're talking that they're basically SOL. They have no other option to go, because that's the only thing they really produce. They don't produce anything, and no one's really going to want to go to a country like that that's very, very oppressive on either of them. They don't want it. Nobody wants to invest in a country that has oppressive rules and has basically been caught in the past of funding terrorism, and basically where one country has been basically caught hacking apart a journalist because the leader to be didn't like what that journalist was saying. And they're not going to essentially work with that country because that's not exactly what you want to be working with. And that's why when we get to like the ideas of NATO, if NATO really has no function anymore, we need to understand that as a country. And people can accuse me of being in the league with the Russians and all this other garbage, but frankly, it doesn't hold water, because when we start to look at the actual original function of NATO, we know that NATO was only meant to go after the Soviet Union, and that was it. It has no other function than that. And once your function ceases, just like any other function, I mean, if when it looks like after the U.S. won its war with World War II, we didn't stick around. We weren't staying around since we weren't going to stick around constantly. We sent our people home, and that was how things went. And that's essentially what needs to happen with NATO. It needs to realize that its objective was won a long time ago, and it needs to cease operations. And it needs to realize it's over. It's been over for a long time. Same thing with Afghanistan and Syria. It's been over for a long time. They need to cease operations. And these are these things that need to happen, where people need to realize this, is that out in Syria, is that we have a situation to where ISIS was defeated. It was defeated actually by mostly by Hezbollah, Iran, and Syria, and with a little bit of help from Russia. Not as much by the United States, because the United States was actually working with people to actually aid them. But we needed to send our people home because we were stupidly backing the wrong side. And then out in Afghanistan, we just need to basically realize that we're not going to create this utopia and just go home. And the fact is, we entered the wrong country when we were looking for bin Laden, and we need to realize that one as well. There's sometimes we have to realize with it that you need to go home, and this is the whole thing. And you need to realize your objective is over, and this is the whole point. And your objective is you need to realize when it's been completed. And once it's been completed, you can't just start making up new objectives and continue on. And this is the whole point that we keep doing, is we keep making up new objectives that make no sense. And it's just to keep people out there and to just keep this boondoggle going on and on and on and on. And that's where things are going wrong. And that's why NATO is continuing to go, and it has no function. But we keep making other points of saying, oh, but it can do this. No, it can't. Its original function has been long dead, and we need to realize it's over. And it has no other function. And we need to realize it's gone. Unless we're going to work with Russia to try and go against Chinese communism, then we have in a new alliance, then we have no actual function. And that would be a complete new treaty organization. And that would be a Pacific-based treaty organization. And it would be like a like the North Pacific Treaty Organization, like an NPTO or something, or just the Pacific Treaty Organization, so we can allow these South Pacific countries to work on that as well. And that would be its purpose, is just to go after China to get them to flip. And it wouldn't be actually based on militarization. It would be based on a protective basis, and just to essentially put some pressure on them to get them to flip. More on the point of spreading of ideas to get them to flip to capitalism. But that would be the only purpose. It wouldn't, and it would be that would be its only function, and it wouldn't be about actually spreading the point of making sure that we have this new NATO type of thing with it. It wouldn't, that would be its only purpose. It wouldn't be this militarization force, and we'd have to realize that we'd have to have an alliance with Russia. Russia isn't our enemy. They're no longer communist, despite what morons in Congress want to believe. They're not. They're not allied with any of those forces like that. They actually are a capitalist nation now. They have been for quite some time. In fact, when it comes to Putin, Putin has actually gotten rid of a lot of state resources to do so. And this is actually where a lot of Democrats have actually gotten mad at him because he's done this. He's actually gone in the opposite direction of what the Soviet Union was originally set up as. And this is where we see him doing. He's actually been against this global order to be more socialist, and he's changed things around. Now, while he's not perfect, he's done things to basically turn around the country, and we need to essentially realize that. And I'm probably just going to end it here with it, because I'm probably going to a little bit later create another podcast, and probably on MMT and the kind of craziness with that, and how people, the kind of myths that people believe on that. And that's about it, and I will see you guys later. Bye, everyone.